Alright, I just watched the Zyzz documentary last night. It took me about 2 hours to finish. I feel like there's a lot to take away from the documentary. As someone that's been lifting for 6 years and generally has just been inspired by a lot of influencers, especially Zyzz in particular. I was about 17 to 18 years old in 2020 when I started lifting, and Zyzz was starting to have he was kind of starting to become a lot more popular again. Like there was a revival of Zyzz, you could say, um, during kind of like the pandemic and 2021 because of TikTok and short form content. And I feel like that kind of at that time being like 17, 18, fairly young, getting into training, you know, he definitely was someone that I was very inspired by when it came to lifting and aesthetics and looking great and all of the external validation and factors that come with your appearance and looking great and working out and all that kind of stuff. That's what he was for me when I was getting into training. And I feel like that's what he was for a lot of people who were starting to get into training around the pandemic. I'm not sure what it was like to be a Zyzz fan pre-COVID or right around the time when he was alive. I'm sure it was a different place, the internet was a different place. He was popular at a time when TikTok wasn't even a thing. Instagram wasn't even a thing. You know, algorithmic con- algorithm algorithmic content wasn't really as much of a thing. And being a fitness influencer or just an influencer in general or a content creator wasn't really something that existed back then in 2010. I mean, obviously there was YouTubers and YouTube exists, but it was in a lot more of a different shadow. It wasn't really seen as like a way to make an income or a living. So he was like ahead of the game. Like him doing all of the like Myron bro and aesthetics and all kind of stuff. Essentially like the looks maxing stuff. Like he was a looks maxer way before that was even like a thing now, And I think that just goes to show that him, Chest Bra, a lot of people back in like the fitness community back in the day were like ahead of the curve when it came to fitness and like what it's become today. I guarantee like every single fitness influencer from like the David Leeds and the Jeff Sides and all of that to like the Trend Twins now and the Joy Meeks, all of them have been inspired by Zyzz one way or another. Now I think a big precedent that goes with Diamond Gym is that I'm mistaking myself so much. A big thing though that I would say that I took away the most from the Zyzz documentary is that obviously with Zyzz, he got into it at a time of his life where he didn't really feel the most accomplished, the most confident in himself. He was generally the person that was in the background of his social life, people around him. Not everybody saw him as like the top guy in like school. And I think when you're young, he was 17, 18 when he got into training. That's like an outlook like that in life can definitely affect the way that you might treat certain people, treat certain things, or go about certain things. And lifting was sort of kind of like that way out for him. It was sort of a way for him to be seen as, that he could be able to accomplish things and that he can be able to feel confident in himself. Like he was able to like have more opportunities because of his appearance and because of that confidence that he had. And I think that when you also see external validation, whether it was more girls liked him or more fame because he started becoming popular because of his physique, but also, he utilized a lot more of his persona. And he noticed that when he was trolling, when he was rage baiting a lot more, that's when he became even more viral, right? That douchebag kind of like personality that he was like relatively known for, that kind of pushed him to do even more things that kind of rewarded him with more attention and more fame, girls, etc. And I think there came a point where, because of how much he was, like, because of how much like fame he was getting and like how much external validation, attention, girls, all that kind of stuff that he was getting, he was willing to like feed into that. So he was obviously going to do like steroids and party drugs and stuff like that to be able to maintain this lifestyle of like going out and like partying and looking more buff and all that kind of stuff, because that's what, you know, was rewarding the lifestyle and the fame and the opportunities that he was getting, you know. And obviously when you're young, right, like he was like 20 to like 22 when all of this was happening, like that obviously can, you know, be something that drives your mind, and you're not going to know any better at that age, you know. I'm 23, right? So I'm like a year after, you know, the year that he passed away, you know, which, I mean, talk about getting old. But, you know, I think that when you're getting in that age range, like, you're not going to know any better compared to when you're in your 30s or 40s. And so obviously, like, that's going to take a really big toll on the way that he might go about certain things, such as his appearance and stuff like that. And obviously in his late teens as well, you know, he had that mindset. It was just pushed to a further degree. It got to a point where it was like he, like, the actual like real person was a Zyzz, but the persona was Zyzz, you know. And at the time, like at the start of his career, like there was obviously like some sort of distinction, you know, because he was just getting to training. But the more that people knew about Zyzz or knew him as a Zyzz, and the more that people kind of fed, you know, the persona of Zyzz, the more that as Zyzz went into the personality of Zyzz. And he leaned so much towards that that it was almost kind of inseparable from his Zyzz. Pretty much he just kind of fell deep into this persona so much that his life kind of revolved around it. You know, they described later in the documentary that he was taking a lot more like Adderall, right? Because he didn't want to feel anxious going out, you know, meeting fans and going to parties and all that kind of stuff. You know, he was having to take like a lot of Adderall to be able to maintain that. He had to take a lot of Coke as well, you know, and that's what they found in like his toxicology report. So he was doing a lot of things to try to like maintain like this like lifestyle, and it was so much of it that the real personality behind it is kind of like it went out the window, and a lot more of the Zyzz personality like took more of the forefront of his personal life. There wasn't really much of a distinction there. And I feel like that's the big thing that a lot of people like my age, we kind of can mistake falling for that when we're in our early 20s. You know, this time of our life, like we're a lot more impressionable. We're a lot more willing to kind of do anything. You know, we're young, so a lot of, you know, external matters are going to matter a lot more to us than later down the life, like later down the line in life, you know? And I feel like you kind of see this mistake a lot with like the looks maxing community now, where looks are just like the top priority of like anything. None of your kind of like longevity in life, none of your cardiovascular health, none of your like relationships with like your family, your friends, or your overall mental health, especially as a man in society. Like no like taking care of yourself or none of that. It's all doing things for the sake of like a look, and to be able to get things such as like attention, girls, fame, etc. because of your looks mattering like all the time and stuff like that. I feel like we kind of are falling into that mistake, and I feel like, you know, with Zyzz, it was sort of kind of like a cautionary tale, and years ago at this point, but it's like it's relatively kind of like in the same fate that like Zyzz kind of fell into the trap and too much into a rabbit hole of looks and like having to like maintain that, you know. But overall, you know, I'd say that Zyzz had a positive impact regardless. Zyzz is someone that like his career wasn't even like that long in retrospect. Like he only was like around for like maybe like 4 years, you know, but his impact like 15 years after he passed away, mind you, there's someone that's just as alive as the time that he's been gone, and yet he's inspired so many people, you know, from the influencers that have been running a lot in the last 10 years, David Lade and Jeff Side and everybody else. It's like, you know, there's teenagers that are 15 years old now that are about as inspired by Zyzz now. And, you know, I just think that, you know, a lot of people, like a lot of Gymshark athletes, you know, LA athletes, all that kind of stuff, they're doing the same sort of like poses and all that kind of stuff that Zyzz did, you know. And I mean, to be able to hold that reign for like 15 years, like, you have to be like so influential, you know. And this guy had a whole revival on TikTok because of, you know, himself, you know what I'm saying? Like, I just think that it shows that he's just so influential and he's just done a lot for lifting in the community, etc. So, and I think just the overall message that, you know, we are all gonna make it, right? Like, we are all together on something. You're not better than anybody else. You know, I'm not better than you. You're not better than me. Like, we're all one. We're all trying to reach a collective goal. You know, regardless of all, like, kind of like the rage baiting and the trolling and stuff like that. Like, he inspired a lot of people to get into the gym before his death, after his death. And he's made people, you know, be able to believe in themselves. You know, to have that belief that regardless of if you're confident of yourself, if you're not the best person in the gym, you're able to turn your life around. You know, he was able to do that for himself. And even though he kind of fell into the trap of like taking a lot of gear and party drugs and all that kind of stuff, he still made a massive transformation to his life that for anybody that's like relatively young and even older too, but especially young, like that's going to be very inspiring for someone. And I think for anybody that sort of wants to be in a better position, like, you're going to be inspired by that story. So overall, you know, Zyzz has meant a lot to me, I feel like, you know, in my lifting journey. I wouldn't say in the last few years I've been very inspired per se, but in my first like 2 to 3 years of lifting, like I was heavily influenced by Zyzz. Used to listen to a lot of like tribute mixes and stuff like that. And still to this day, honestly, like some like fan tribute mixes have probably some of the best music I've heard. But overall, you know, very inspired by Zyzz. You know, he's done a lot for me, and I feel like he's done a lot for everybody. And so I'm happy that there's a documentary out, you know, about his whole story, and I'm glad that, you know, he still has the impact that he's had for many years and probably will continue to. So that's all I have to say. Hope you guys take away something too. We're all going to make it. Rest in peace, Zyzz.